Welcome in everyone to Flyover Footy. If you're watching on the stream, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much for joining me. It's just myself today, Matt Baker, and I can't wait to talk about everything related to this 3-0 St. Louis City win. So strap in and we'll get started here in just a minute. Probably the earliest fallout that we have done in quite some time. I'm recording this at a crisp 7:15 in the morning on the day after. Thoughts are fresh. Reactions are knee-jerk to an extent. So hopefully this is hopefully there's some quality takes in this one. I'm pretty excited to be here. All right, might as well not beat around the bush anymore, so I'll go ahead and get started with the pod recording as everyone joins in on the live stream. And if you're watching on YouTube, skip ahead a little bit if you're watching this later on. Maybe you slept in, probably smartly slept in from that match because there was probably a lot of celebrating going on after it appropriately. It's definitely a celebration-worthy match, that's for sure. Morning to everybody who's joining me on X, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Appreciate you being here so early. That is absolutely for sure. And if you're joining on the live stream, if you're listening in, feel free to drop a comment in. Engage, be part of the conversation. Love to bring up anything you guys are talking about, anything you're curious on. I've got the flyover thread pulled up from last night that had some of the comments you guys have, and it definitely plays into a lot of the notes that I have. So it will absolutely be a part of this Fallout live stream, Fallout pod recording. So much to love about last night. Let's get right to it. Welcome in everyone to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker, joining you on this week's fallout of a 3-0 St. Louis City win, the finale at CITYPARK. St. Louis really comes through doing everything that they talked about, everything they needed to show fans, send them home happy. That last time at CITYPARK in 2024, I was talking with some friends before the game, noting that you never really want to look forward to a final match at CITYPARK. You never want to look forward to a final match of a season because that means you're eliminated from the playoffs. There's no other way to get around that. But when all of that took place, when all that is as the backdrop of this, you couldn't really ask for a better showing, given the form St. Louis had started the season at and they ended the season at. I mean, it's night and day. There's a lot to love about this match. I'm excited to be here. I'm by myself on today's episode, so you're just going to hear me. You're going to hear that stream of conscious that you had the other week on Flyover. Hope you enjoyed this look at the 3-0 St. Louis win because there's a lot that played into it. There's a lot of things that we have to take away now that we're kind of sitting with ourselves for a couple of weeks before that final game against Minnesota United, decision day to end the season, this being our last home match at CITYPARK. Hopefully you enjoyed it if you went to the game. I know post-game with the fireworks, with watching Roman Berkey take shots from Rasmus Alm, Joachim Nilsson's kids. I mean, it doesn't get better than that. I mean, if you're looking for a way to kind of frame how to feel about this match, just think back about that. I posted a video on Twitter about that, where it was adorable while the fireworks were going off. The kids were having fun on the match. The players were enjoying themselves. The staff were clearly enjoying themselves. It was just a fun time. So let's get into it. Let's start off like we usually do on Fallout with the starting 11. Roman Berkey, Thomas Totland, Henry Kessler, Joachim Nilsson, Giannis Horn, Akil Watts, Edu Leuven, Cedric Teuchert, Marcel Hartl, Simon Betcher, and Klaus. A 4-2-2-2 of sorts, though this team really kept consistent their ability to have movement with those four attackers. And that's kind of becoming a thread here, not only with John Hackworth's St. Louis City team, but with this group in particular, whether you have Klaus, Betcher, Alm, Hartle, Teuscher, Thorson. I mean, there's a lot of movement that occurs here. Some takeaways that I had with the starting 11 were that it was basically the same that we saw with Sporting KC, except for plugging in Joachim Nilsson, who is now healthy. I think he would have played against SKC had he been fully fit. And you had Simon Betcher return to the starting lineup. Both of those players, along with the rotation that we saw midweek, this was one of, if not the strongest St. Louis lineups. And I think it speaks to the argument of what is St. Louis's best lineup, because Simon Betcher scored a brace in this game. And previously, I think a lot of people, myself included at times, would argue that Rasmus Alm should be joining Klaus when you talk about the ideal starting 11. But I think no matter what you look at, there's conversations either way. There's debate, legitimate debate about that. And some of those debates don't even include Klaus. But no matter how you're going to look at this, a big takeaway has to be, if you're going to argue about the starting 11 and you're arguing it in this manner, I think that's a net win no matter what. When you're looking at the starting 11 saying, I think this is our best, I think this is our best, and both have valid arguments at that level where it's Klaus and Betcher, it's Klaus and Alm, it's Betcher and Alm, and you have Hartle and Teuscher with them, that's fantastic. That is something that you want to be able to build towards to provide the depth that we've so sorely lacked for most of this season. Also, great news, Joachim Nilsson, first back-to-back start since his initial injury back in June 15th against Dallas. I mean, it warms your heart to see Joachim Nilsson back in the starting lineup consistently, sans his wisdom teeth. That's just a massively funny story to follow. But the more he starts, the better St. Louis is going to be positioned going forward into 2025. Seeing him healthy, fully fit, that's fantastic. I mean, that's more backline options, better, higher quality on the backline. Joachim Nilsson and Henry Kessler showed an awful lot in this game to like. The 4-2-2-2 formation with Betcher and Klaus, Hackworth said it pretty good post-game. I enjoyed this comment. It kind of foreshadows a little bit of the conversation we're going to have on this episode. Hackworth saying, we were pressing very differently, and that kept the four of them very close. One reason I was happy about the first 20 minutes is you saw the four of them kind of interchanging where they started defensively and where they started attacking-wise. When you get those guys, I talk about mobility, but understanding when they're playing in a different role, not necessarily a different position, but we wanted to get all four of them going in the attack and helping each other get into this game, and they certainly did that. And I think back in the SKC game in particular, it was incredibly noticeable how you would have, at times, Teuscher step up with Klaus, you would have Alm step up with Klaus, you would have Marcel Hartle moving wide, moving inside. The shapes were changing a little bit. Even if the shapes weren't changing, you had the players, the personnel changing. And that was giving St. Louis different looks, different abilities, because that kind of makes the back line for the opposition unsure of who's going to be where at any given moment. That's one of the reasons it works so well, is because you have these players, these high caliber players like a Betcher or a Teuscher able to make these runs, and the defense doesn't know who's going to be initiating that long ball, who's going to be going high for any of these moments. That's one of the most exciting things. And Betcher's quality was really shining last night. It was really shining in the way he was receiving balls, the way he was winning duels, drawing fouls. I mean, Simon Betcher, when he came to St. Louis City as part of this loan, you knew what his quality was from SLU. He had moments of really high-level brightness with the Vancouver Whitecaps, but it wasn't sustained. We're seeing Betcher over the course of the last few games, this back half of the season since the transfer window, sustaining that level of quality. And it's up and down as far as whether it's a brace level or whether it's just contributing or just being a good body on the field. But I don't think he's really had a poor game overall. There have been games where you haven't seen the quality in mixing, I think, of Betcher and Klaus. And at times I've complained about that. But I look back at those games where Betcher and Klaus didn't have great games together, either one of them, and it was positioning more so than anything, kind of keeping Betcher a little wider than where he needs to be. And when you have these four and you're giving them the freedom and flexibility to move around, I think that's a winning combination no matter how you look at it. So overall thoughts in this game. My first thing is very clearly Roman Berkey. Roman Berkey with 5 saves, had the clean sheet, first clean sheet since I believe it was July or June. And then Roman Berkey he didn't quite have a standing on his head type of game because he wasn't facing the massive quality of shots that he has previously. But he stood on his head to an extent. He had a fantastic performance. He anchored that back line, earned his clean sheet, every bit of it. The one that I wanted to see before going into this, the one that we really thought was possible because this Houston Dynamo team hasn't been a goal scoring phenom. They haven't been a goal allowing team as well, but scoring goals, I think they haven't really peppered you as much. And they had an injury to Hector Herrera, so he wasn't available in this game. He didn't go. That didn't cripple them, but it didn't help their ball progression. St. Louis took full advantage of it. Berkey wasn't tested at all in the first half. In the second half, he was very much so, preserving the clean sheet and deserving every bit of credit for that. Top to bottom, though, this was just a fantastic game. No huge unforced errors. The back line played cohesively. I'm going to talk about Nilsson and Kessler here in a little bit, but I agree with Aaron Leak in the chat that they looked great as a back line together. Top to bottom, fantastic. Horn, Nilsson, Kessler, Thomas Totland, the back line connected so incredibly well. I saw multiple moments where Giannis Horn, along with Henry Kessler and Joakim Nilsson, were all three deep. They had high fives going after a sequence well done. Totland kept his space well on the right side, was in some really quality 1v1 moments. And I think that worked. So Giannis Horn, we're seeing at times be a little more defensive minded, or at least staying deeper. Even when he contributed to the goal that we're going to talk about in a minute, he stayed deeper. He was a little more allowing Thomas Totland to move higher. And going into this game, that's one of the things I really wanted to see is how will our fullbacks engage in transition? Will they both push high like we've seen before, leaving Kessler and Nilsson along with maybe a defensive midfielder like Watts as a three-man back line of sorts? Or will they have that asymmetrical shape that we saw a lot last year? We've seen at times this year where one fullback will move up and you have the other three dropping deeper, and you spread them out a little bit along with the coverage that a Leuven or a Watts can provide. And that's what I think we saw a lot. And it worked very well. Definitely worked leading into some of the goals where Giannis Horn was able to provide that vision and distribution from that deeper position. And it helps when you have a guy like Marcel Hartl on the left, predominantly on the left, even when you're not changing some of those movements that I mentioned a few minutes ago. You have Marcel Hartl in that position. And one of the problems I think we've had at times in the back half of the season is Marcel Hartl's been covered up, or he's had to drop deeper. That was a complaint in the last couple of days is Marcel Hartl runs all over the place, but you want him to be running in the attacking third. You want to be giving him space, sending the ball up for him so that he's in that attacking half of wherever City is setting up. And I think they did a good job of doing that, whether they were dropping back defensively in their mid-block, which they were for most of this game, or higher up. I think you had Marcel Hartl in a good positioning, and he was in the right place to make the moves. And part of that comes from Giannis Horn not overlapping him. Part of it comes from giving him space to work, and Giannis Horn being that defensive coverage. So that has to go noticed because I think it impacted not just Marcel Hartl, but also where Edu Leuven and Akil Watts were able to play. I liked how the City press really showed. John Hackworth said post-game on the positioning, specifically of Thomas Totland, but I think it also speaks to the mentality of the press that Houston, they tried to overload you like a lot of teams do. So overloading, putting multiple guys on one side of the field, doing what St. Louis does kind of often, where you're trying to have a numerical advantage. And when Houston tried to overload you, Totland handled the situation really well, Hackworth said, because there was nobody to put pressure on the ball. And so Totland's decision-making there, previously, we've always gone. And we're going to be working on saying, look, if you have a numerical disadvantage, it's okay to just drop and take away the space that they're trying to attack, which is in general behind you and central. So it's knowing situational game awareness. It's not just having one gear, one speed, and saying we're pressing. No matter who has the ball, we're always moving on the ball. This is the change that I think we've seen under John Hackworth. It's that ability and willingness to be smart in the moment. It's the willingness to say, just because the opponent has the ball doesn't mean we're going after them at all times and we're trying to create our own overloads no matter where they are on the field. This is something that had been a frustrating thing and really facilitated a lot of those transition moments where our defensive back line was taken advantage of. And so if you're a St. Louis City team and you're a defender or a fullback or a midfielder, and you're able to have this confidence that you can, and this direction from the coaching staff, that you can make these decisions of if you're in an advantage position where you have numbers near yourself on the field and you can pressure and try to win the ball back, do it. Otherwise, you have the freedom and flexibility to take space away, to take positions away from where the pass will go. So you're blocking a player from coming into a position, but you're dropping back enough to where you're not allowing them to find that next pass. And that's what St. Louis did really well last night. And I think has starting to become a bit of a staple under John Hackworth implemented system. So we're talking about Hackworth later on as a head coach and what this means for his future. But in general, I think this is a really good indication of what he can do in employing this system, which is what you want your head coach to be doing. And I thought overall, the game played out as well as we really expected and kind of not quite to a T, but pretty similar. Houston possessed a lot. They created those overloads down the wings where they were strong at, and they typically do. They like to spray it from Artur or Ache out to the wing. They didn't have Herrera. They had Coco Carrasquilla dropping in a little bit like he had been previously. And you had Houston making the most of their long ball opportunities. This is a team in the Houston Dynamo who like to create long shots. They don't have high quality. We talked about the overall low quality of shots from both teams going into this, and Houston kept to that. St. Louis had a lot more high quality shots with the ball than Houston did, very clearly evidenced by the stats. St. Louis engaged a bit deeper. Like I said, they were different and more intelligent with their pressing and their decision making. They made use of the long ball better than they did midweek, and in the passing instance, not shots long like Houston did, but just sending the ball long. I'll talk about Roman Berkey's distribution here in a bit, but that has to be a focal point of St. Louis with the way that they play. That is a facet of their style, the long ball, the aerial duels, and they did that to a T in this match against Houston. They attempted some high quality crosses. They led the game in crossing. They were controlling in the game's opposition half, especially in the first half. That was a huge point, is you dictate the pace, you dictate the flow, and you play your style. St. Louis did that extremely well in the first half, limiting Houston to just one shot, no shots on target in the first half. Now, there were some fascinating moments, and you guys are talking about them in the chat on this live stream. I'm going to get to them as far as Roman Berkey, Klaus, but it starts. Let's just start it where I think the game really found its footing, which was that 14th minute goal. Going into this goal, it was a back and forth match, I think. Teams were just trying to figure each other out. Nobody took too dangerous of a shot opportunity. You had St. Louis with some moments clearly trying to break Houston down in transition, and they were obviously more on the front foot than Houston was. But at 14 minutes, it was Simon Betcher from Cedric Teuchert and Giannis Horn. This was the Horn distribution that I mentioned from deep. St. Louis at this point forced Houston back to their goalkeeper on the previous play. They kept a high line as the team was fully pressuring Houston in their own end as they were kind of just methodically working them back, continuing to draw Houston deeper into their own zone. Houston couldn't clear it. Steve Clark could not get it out. And then on the next sequence, it was Artur who attempted a pass or attempted to clear the ball, something. It really wasn't clear what he was trying to do with the ball, but he turned it over. He sent it right back to Giannis Horn in the left channel for St. Louis City in their attacking half. And it was Horn who crossed it up to Cedric Teuchert, high right. Teuchert, this sequence happened fast. Teuchert with just one touch with his foot, his right foot, touched it as a ground cross over to Simon Betcher, who had been crashing near post. Hackworth had glowing comments about this near post shot. Near post for Simon Betcher, receiving the Cedric Teuchert pass. Betcher had one touch of his own, putting it high above the keeper and putting City up 1-0 early. That set the tone. And Betcher to be in this position, multiple runs. This is Simon Betcher. What he did so well against Houston is he made these runs. And I think his timing to get past the back line, whether it was in the attacking half in possession, in a very concise area like this, or later on when he spread the field, Simon Betcher with his decision making and his ability to make these runs is something that St. Louis absolutely needs going forward. Now, one other notable moment in the first half was Roman Berkey at 37 minutes or so. If you watch this, I think it came through on the broadcast, but definitely at CITYPARK it was visible. Berkey was out near midfield, and he was chirping at everyone, not just Houston, not just the refs. He was yelling at his own players, telling them to get back, barking out orders. Leuven and Berkey got into it a little bit. And yeah, it did get a little bit chippy, like Robert Clare says in the chat. Berkey kept his team focused in that, and I couldn't agree more. Everyone was dialed in. And Hackworth said that to a point. This was in reference to Hackworth saying post-game on a question that was related to the mentality coming into this game. Did he feel like there was less to play for. And so you would have kind of more free flowing, almost laissez-faire type attitude. And Hackworth's talking about the energy, talking about Berkey yelling in that moment. And Berkey and Hackworth really saying post LAFC, that whole room on the way back from LA, everyone was dialed in and super focused, Hackworth said. Like you saw Roman and Edu have an emotional moment in the first half at this 37-minute mark. Hackworth said, like, that doesn't happen if you're just, happily going through it. We felt like we needed to go show this club, the fan base, everybody, what we were about and what they could expect in 2025. So that's what we saw. That was what this moment from Roman Berkey in the first half really epitomized for me. And the first half played out pretty similar like we expected. Like I said, Houston was being stingy with their defensive shape. City was exploiting it well. They stayed within themselves. They controlled the half despite not really controlling possession. Houston won possession in the first half, 54-46. But winning possession doesn't translate to winning, obviously. Winning possession doesn't translate to winning chances. City outshot Houston 7-1 in that first half. City won the XG battle 0.99 to 0.07, and they went into half with a 1-goal lead, allowing just one total shot. That was exactly what St. Louis needed to do, keeping this tight lead. Yeah, they weren't able to extend it, but if you go into half knowing that you're keeping the clean sheet, knowing that you're keeping Houston from getting anywhere near goal, that's the confidence builder you need going into the second half. And so from there, it's just needing to start off on the right foot. And if you're talking about those moments where St. Louis has, at times this season, lost points or winning positions, going into half, coming out of half, this game gave you everything you needed to see to feel confident that that ability is there for St. Louis going into 2025 to win these moments, to win the rest of the first half going into halftime, to win that moment coming out of the second half, because it was just 2 minutes later for Simon Betcher coming out of halftime, 47 minutes, receiving the pass from Marcel Hartl in transition to score. And this was St. Louis deep. This was St. Louis withstanding a Houston attack. This wasn't on the front foot like their first goal. This was Houston pressuring, getting the ball into their attacking half, and St. Louis dropping back fully as needed, taking away the space. And when you talk about taking away space, you talk about Marcel Hartl and his interception, taking away the pass from Artur that led directly to this goal. That's what it was, plain and simple. It was Marcel Hartl reading the play. Such a high-quality play by him in the left channel, the left wing, intercepting the Artur pass. Another Artur pass intercepted, and he doesn't give these away very often, very easily. St. Louis took 2 from him. That's massive for what they were able to do off the ball. So Marcel Hartl takes this ball, and he creates a transition moment very quickly. Deep in possession from his left side, Hartl quickly got it over to Simon Betcher, who immediately started his run. I don't think the camera quite caught this on the broadcast because it was out of frame, but it was obvious. If you watch where Hartl takes possession of the ball and how quickly he's able to get it up to Betcher, when Betcher receives this pass, he's timed his run so perfectly that he's beyond the Houston backline when he receives it. I mean, he's in a 1v1 with Steve Clark, the keeper, at this point, because Simon Betcher timed his run so perfectly, telling that Marcel Hartl was going to intercept the ball. It wouldn't surprise me if he started his run before Hartl even got the ball. But I know by the time Hartl had intercepted the pass, Betcher was immediately off and running. That's what you need to see. It's another example of Simon Betcher, just such a high quality off the ball knowledge and awareness of where you need to be and what you need to be doing, knowing he can break that back line so well. Absolutely fantastic to see. I noticed in the second half, around 59, 60 minutes, there's a sequence where City was in possession, and I called this kind of the epitome of what the back line can do. Jonas Horn, Henry Kessler, Joachim Nilsson. Thomas Totland was a little bit wider right. He was kind of assuming his attacking role, that shape that I mentioned earlier, asymmetrical. Jonas Horn's back a little bit. He's still near midfield. He's still higher than the center backs, but it's not the same as what Thomas Totland was doing for large parts. Tots was wider right, and then you had the other 4 defenders, considering Berkey a defender in this instance, play long passes to each other. I mean, they were spreading the field wide. And you had that opportunity for St. Louis to really be pressured by Houston. Houston was deep in St. Louis's zone. You're talking about back near the penalty box area and in the penalty box area for a few players. But you had St. Louis be composed. You had St. Louis be absolutely clinical in their long passing. And I enjoyed seeing Jonas Horn, Henry Kessler, Joachim Nilsson, and Roman Berkey beat this quote-unquote press that Houston was doing with their long passes that triggered Cedric Toyshirt high. Around 60 minutes, Toyshirt lost the ball in the box, but that wasn't the point to me. The fact that it didn't amount to anything, it just showed what St. Louis can do to absorb pressure with these players. And you had Giannis Horn. If you were in City Park watching Giannis Horn, you could see how often he was trying to tell his defenders, get the ball back to Berkey, restart this sequence. And we know that Roman Berkey is so adept at being able to send that long ball after you need to restart a sequence. You don't need to play the ball higher at midfield between your back line. You can use Roman Berkey as that fifth defender. And Giannis Horn knew that. He called for it. St. Louis did that extremely well last night, using Berkey as an outlet just as much as he had been in the past, something they had been missing with Ben Lunton net. As good a job as Lunton did against LAFC, Berkey with his distribution adds an entirely new facet. So you get to this point where it's around 62 minutes. Houston starts subbing Gaines for Aliu, one of their best attackers rather. And then you get to 70 minutes. 70 minutes with the Nukvi Thorson, Rasmus Alm sub in for Cedric Toyshirt and Klaus. Notable for a few reasons. Notable because St. Louis kept their shape, moving Marcel Hartl higher up on the field as his kind of default position alongside Simon Betcher. Thor and Alm take positions in the wider mid areas. But also notable because, as people commented post-game, Klaus, as he left the field, did not quite appear like he was super happy with going off the field. Didn't seem like he was seeing eye to eye with Hackworth. And we found out post-game kind of why that was. And it was noticeable that Klaus didn't exactly like being subbed off, but it was also Klaus didn't exactly like how his positioning was during the game. All these positives that we're talking about, you look at Klaus and say, well, he was probably the one who was the most upset or at least had the least involvement overall. And Hackworth said it pretty clearly post-game. When asked if Klaus was upset at being subbed off, he said no. That's not it at all. Klaus was pretty tired. Klaus said, Coach, I've played more as a 6 tonight than I've played as a 9. Do you want me to play as a 6 as he goes off and goes in the tunnel and goes to the locker room for a bit? That's kind of that conversation. If you picture a striker going off the field asking his coach, do you want me to play as a 6? Because that's what I've been doing. You get an idea of how frustrated Klaus was. He's not just going to use those terminologies, use that quickly to his coach if he's not feeling extremely frustrated. And Hackworth said, no, you played awesome, Klaus. Thank you. But he, as joking as that is, Hackworth was acknowledging Klaus was a little frustrated. He said he was a little frustrated. He's a goal scorer. He wants to score goals. But at the same time, we need to win games like this where somebody else is finding the back of the net. And he's contributing because he's doing so much more defensively. Something that we talk about Klaus being so good at so often is his defensive work off the ball in that attacking portion of St. Louis's formation, but doing the defensive work. Hackworth said huge credit to him. I wouldn't say he's going to come into my office tomorrow probably and say, hey, we got to sort this out. I'm like, let's win 3-0. Talk to me later. And they did that. This post game is the thought of Klaus being frustrated with his positioning, but there's nothing to worry about here. Klaus has these moments, and this is the thing where you need to understand St. Louis now has the quality in the attack where you're not going to have every single player fire on all cylinders. This was a Simon Betcher game. This was a Marcel Hartl 2-assist game. This is those kinds of players. Cedric Toyshirt with his assist. Those are the kinds of moments where players are going to shine, and they get the glory at the end of the game. Sometimes you have this other striker, if you're running 2 strikers, where they're not going to get the glory. Hartl and Toyshirt have been playing extremely high quality for the duration that they've been with City. And so they're not really slowing down. But in the striker role, that could happen, where you're having Betcher make these runs, you're finding a single player, and Klaus is doing other things. He still had 7 duels won in this game, same as Betcher. He still had a lot of the defensive pressure being performed. So he was dropped back a little deeper at times, obviously not as egregious as playing the 6. That's more, anecdotal Klaus frustration going off the field. But he did what he needed to do. And when you see that frustration from your striker, that's not a bad thing either. It's not a bad thing to have Klaus make these kinds of comments because it shows the passion. It shows the frustration that he wants to be that goal scorer. And so I think back to the conversations with Klaus and Nico Gioacchini last year, even Sam Adeniran of the striker's mentality, often citing Zlatan Ibrahimovic and how you want a striker to be so passionate, so desperate to score goals. That's what Klaus was. And so these comments post-game are more reassuring to me than anything that Klaus knows what he wants to be doing, and he's frustrated that he doesn't get that opportunity. But when St. Louis wins 3-0, when they're winning 2-0 at that point where he's subbing off, you can't really argue either point. Hack's doing what he needs to do to get the ball in good positions for St. Louis to score. Klaus is doing what he needs to do. And when emotions settle down a little bit, everybody's going to be cool. Nothing to worry about with that to me, but it was absolutely noticeable. So after that happened, Houston made a few more subs. They kind of retooled their attack with Sebastian Ferreira and Latif Blessing entering the game, Ponce and Coco Kerski leaving. At that point, it's around 75 minutes, and it's noticeable that Roman Berkey has punched out 3 saves from hard range shots in the second half. Roman Berkey's doing what he needs to do, being smart with his saves to punch the ball out to his fullbacks, to his defensive, his back line. And so you have Berkey not worried about trying to scoop something up and leaving open a rebound. He's just clearing the ball, knowing that he's got a back line that can recover it and then move the ball out as they need to. 79 minutes, things start to change a little bit. Franco Escobar picks up his second yellow card, which gets him sent off for a red. And you have Houston then subbing out Junior Moreno and Tate Schmidt into the game for Artur and Sebastian Kolchik. They tightened up defensively. I think they kind of acknowledged, let's be honest, at this point at 83 minutes that the game was probably lost. They're down 2-0, save face. There's not a whole lot they were able to do breaking through, even with higher possession, more shots on target in the second half. It was still a St. Louis controlled game because they weren't allowing Houston near their goal in the penalty box to make these dangerous opportunities. 83 minutes, you had what ended up being an extremely important sub with Jake Nerwinski subbing in for Giannis Horn and Jake taking the left back role. This was fascinating for a few different reasons. It was obviously giving fresh legs on the left side, getting Giannis Horn out. It was obviously a defensive-minded decision, but it was notable to me because of the personnel, obviously. Jake Nerwinski's a right back, and it's not even just he's a right center back where he can slide over. He's played this position. He's played a left center back in a 3 center back role with Vancouver before, so he has experience on the left side, but it's obviously not his forte. Notable because we had Jay Reed on the bench. We had Kyle Hebert on the bench. We had Josh Yarrow on the bench. Hebert ended up coming in, so it seemed like he was destined to take that Joachim Nilsson role. And so if you see that, it kind of creates a couple different conversation points. First of all, I said this pregame, Jake Nerwinski is a John Hackworth guy. He's obviously proven himself in training. He's obviously proven himself in the matches that he's had the opportunity to get into in the past few games. And so this was not a care about who we're trying to set up for the future. One of the points to bring this back to personnel over the past few games have been, do we want to give guys an opportunity to prove themselves for the future? Like a Jay Reed, do we want to see more minutes for players who are under contract for long periods of time? Maybe they're young, maybe they just had a homegrown deal, etc. Jake doesn't fit any of those bills. If anything, Jake, the writing is on the wall for Jake Nerwinski. He's acknowledged it, and he acknowledged it post-game that this might be his last game at City Park. And so you bring in a player like Jake, it doesn't fit any of those bills. It's just Jake has earned this, pure and simple. And that's nice to see from Hackworth, that he's not too worried about the future. He's worried about the moment. He's worried about giving guys opportunities they've earned, regardless of their status in the future. Don't worry about that. Just worry about what's going on in the field. Nerwinski comes in for Horn, but the other thing it tells me is if Hebert was destined for the Joachim Nilsson sub, where does that leave Josh Yarrow? And not to swirl on this topic too much, but I think the writing is probably on that wall as much as we all hate to see it and acknowledge it. We'll talk about that plenty more in the offseason, but that was notable. Nerwinski coming in for those few reasons. After that, you had Indiana Vassilev and Kyle Hebert come in for Leuven and Nilsson. And I'll have a Hackworth quote on Nilsson here in a minute, but that was prescribed. That sub where Nilsson came out, nothing to read into as far as I know right now from post-game comments or anything we've seen on Joachim Nilsson other than it was prescribed. It was good to see Indiana Vassilev back in the game. Absolutely. Can't go unnoticed. Didn't have a whole lot of impact on the game, but back after his concussion, finishing out the season with City on the field. Fantastic to see. And it all kind of led to 90+2. St. Louis is up 2-0 at this point. Jake Nerwinski from Marcel Hartl. St. Louis took possession. They worked it over to Thomas Totland on the right-hand side, who played it to the right channel for Marcel Hartl, kind of slicing through a couple defenders. Hartl takes it to the touchline. I counted 7 defenders that he drew with his ball movement that were either in the center of the box in the penalty area or near Marcel Hartl. He took it to the touchline, drew those 7 players over, and then crossed it over top of all of them, leading to Jake Nerwinski far post. If you mentioned my excitement, if you remember my excitement earlier when I mentioned Simon Betcher near post with that run, this was the other thing that St. Louis has been a little better at taking advantage of here in the recent history. It's using the far post. It's drawing defenders in using that dribbling skill that Marcel Hartl or Cedric Toy should have, those examples, and then having the back post be exposed, the far post be where you can go to. Jake Nerwinski created space, was just outside the 6-yard box in the left channel. Hartl passed it over top of those 7 defenders. Jake settled it with his chest, finished it on the far post from where he was to cap off that 3-0 win for St. Louis. And if you want to be on a high from St. Louis, go back to that 90+2, watch that goal, watch Jake's reaction afterwards. The joy on his face, the joy on the team's face just shows you everything you need to know about what this team has been through and how much of just a release this game was for all of them. Jake had comments post-game about the future, but in the moment, this was everything. This was Jake being the 20th different goal scorer for St. Louis, setting an MLS single-season record for the number of different goal scorers, having scored these 49 goals that St. Louis has. And this was just the absolute cap to this entire game. In the second half itself, City absorbed so much pressure. They acquiesced possession 63-37 in this half. So Houston, with their league leading possession numbers, really furthered that in the second half. Houston might have led in XG in the second half, 1.27 to 0.62, but St. Louis had a higher expected goals on target, 1.09 to 0.48. The longer, lower quality shots by Houston really didn't make a difference, didn't pressure too much. The 3 quality punch-out saves added to the 5 total for Roman Berkey, and you had a complete win for St. Louis. The final numbers looked really good for St. Louis. 41% possession to St. Louis, kind of the bread and butter going on. You had 1.62 expected goals for St. Louis to 1.34 for Houston. Even more egregious for, if you check like MLS, or I'm sure FBref will have a different number. But the expected goals on target was great. 1.91 to St. Louis, 0.48 to Houston, and it all came in the second half for them. Both teams had 9 shots. Houston actually ended up with more shots on target, 4-3, but St. Louis had more shots inside the box, 7-5. So a lot more closer, better opportunities for St. Louis. Houston dominated the passing volume, no surprise there with their possession numbers, but St. Louis had more accurate long balls, 33. 19 of these coming from Roman Berkey, with 13 aerial balls sent by him. You had more crosses, 4-3. Duels, Houston actually won the ground duels 40-30, but in a prototypical City manner that I say, City had aerial duels on lockdown 19-6. So Berkey, I think I said 19. Berkey had 13 long balls distributed, leading to those 19 aerial duels. And a lot of the passing network data that you're seeing post game is really quality for what it shows to St. Louis, keeping that tight formation in the middle. All the players played extremely well together, and this is how you needed to break down what Houston was offering. Houston had kind of a mid-block like St. Louis did, but St. Louis did a good job of stretching them, pulling them out, creating these runs, creating these moments. If you look at the goals added post-game, Simon Betcher is, I might say Simon Betcher has the single game record for most goals added, and that looks at every single on-the-ball touch. Every single opportunity to influence the ball plays into this. You have the shooting, the passing, the receiving, the fouls, every single action really plays into this. And so Simon Betcher holistically, which is what you want to see from a striker, not a striker who holds up play, but a striker who, is in that transition, who is more of the runner. That's what Simon Betcher was. You also had Henry Kessler, Joachim Nilsson. Klaus had high goals added. I mean, this is a complete performance where the lowest goals added was kind of Knut Thorsen there at the end, where he was playing the ball in deeper positions. And Knut Thorsen, there's a comment from Jerry in the chat too. Thorsen kept the defenders occupied that gave Jake the time to set up the score. And Hackworth noted this postgame. The positioning off the ball of Knut Thorsen led to the goal by Jake. It wasn't just Hartl drawing in all the defenders near the touchline. It was Thorsen moving over and helping to create that space behind him. He drew multiple defenders with him. So good off-the-ball work. It's things like that. It's the intangibles that shouldn't go unnoticed by all these players playing high quality, but sometimes does. And so St. Louis wins this one 3-0. I think the one of the more interesting notes of this game is on the average height of defensive actions. Mention this in relation to PPDA, the passes per defensive action, the pressing, all of this conversation. John Hackworth's team is now I mean, we had enough data before this, but I think this one reinforces it. It's a different kind of press. It's not the all out attack the ball carrier no matter where they are. That conversation I had earlier mentioning taking away spaces, being smart, falling back when you need to. The average height of defensive actions in this game was, I would say, one of the lowest that St. Louis has had this season, but it's actually kind of in line with where Hackworth's City team has been, around 33.95 meters from their own goal, which is about halfway between midfield and where Berkey's net was. It was lower than where Houston's average height of defensive actions were. Houston, we know, is not a high pressing team. We had the stats to back that up going into this game. But, you had the opportunity for St. Louis to be a little more intelligent with this. And so they took it. That's the John Hackworth team that plays off the ball. And it's kind of exciting. You play smarter. You don't get caught in a position to play into Houston's hands. Fun to see. Let's look at some individual players as we get near the end of this. Simon Betcher, obviously, player of the match. 2 goals, scores his 3rd and 4th MLS goals of the season. 3rd time in his professional career he's notched a brace. But he did more than that. Betcher did more than just score goals. He drew 5 fouls, a game high. He won 7 duels, tied for second with Klaus. Thomas Totland led the team with 8. But Betcher was doing everything he needed to with the ball and to put the team in good position aside from scoring goals. He had a fantastic game. Thomas Totland, noteworthy for having 8 duels, 1 leading the game in that regard, both teams. He also had the most touches for St. Louis. Edu Leuven is typically the player who has the most touches for St. Louis by and large. Leuven was 3rd with 53 touches. Totland had the most for City with just 62. They didn't have possession. They didn't need it. They didn't want it. This played well into their game plan. And so if you remember earlier, the 3-man back line at times that I mentioned of Horn, Kessler, and Nilsson, Totland was out getting touches. That's just what he was doing. Roman Berkey, 15th career MLS shutout with 5 saves in this one. Those 13 accurate long balls I mentioned. We're now back to seeing Berkey average his long balls to a point where it's impacting the game, something we were missing with Ben Lunt at LAFC. Marcel Hartl earned his team-leading 7th MLS assist. Marcel Hartl now has 11 goal contributions over 12 games in all competitions. Hartl and Teuchert, these 2 guys, their impact to St. Louis has been as successful as we'd hoped, and it is the thing that everything else is built around. Hartl's 11 goal contributions over 12 games, 4 goals and 7 assists, complements Cedric Teuchert, who had his 4th assist in MLS play in this game. And through 13 games in all competitions for Teuchert, he's notched 11 goal contributions of his own. Kind of the inverse of Hartl. 7 goals, 4 assists, and has 3 assists in his last game. Think about the complementary work there. 11 goal contributions for each of those players over their last 12 and 13 games since they've arrived, and they are opposite. Hartl with 4 goals, 7 assists. Teuchert with 7 goals, 4 assists. You couldn't ask for a better yin-yang going on here. Jonas Horn, one of our other new arrivals, logged his 2nd assist of the season. And Henry Kessler, Joachim Nilsson. Let's talk about them for a second. Hackworth's comments post-game, quote, "I like the partnership they're building, and that is certainly something that is really important to us going into next year. I thought Kess was outstanding tonight, and to see Joachim, we have planned minutes, and Joachim was not supposed to be in the game that long, but with wanting to give Berkey a shutout and a center back that was in good form, he was on fumes in the last 5 minutes. I feel bad that I left him in as long as I did, but then I don't feel bad at all because I wanted him to do that. So really nice for us." And that's where you were. That's why Nilsson was on prescribed minutes, stayed in that long, because Hackworth knew how well he was playing. And he knew, this really speaks to something here, he knew he wanted to give Berkey a shutout, a clean sheet. That means something. Clean sheets aren't just something that we talk about post-game. That's how impactful and meaningful they were. It wasn't just getting the win in this game, but if you make it to 85 minutes or so and Berkey's got the clean sheet and he hasn't had a clean sheet in months, you want to see that out. You need to give Roman Berkey, a player of this caliber, that confidence booster going into the final game of the season, going into the offseason, knowing that they finished their CITYPARK schedule with a clean sheet. That's how important it was. Jake Nerwinski, let's touch on him for a second. 1 goal, first goal scored since 2021, and he became that 20th different goal scorer for City this year that I mentioned, setting a single season MLS record. And the quote that I mentioned earlier that Jake said post-game, quote, "It means a lot. As I said about a month ago, this is one of the hardest seasons of my career. Disappointing that I didn't get, a lot of game time, but this last month, I think that I tried to take my opportunities as much as I could, And I know that I'm known as a defensive guy, but, to be able to push forward at left back and get a goal, it just felt great. Especially last game of the season at City Park. I don't know what the future holds for me, but if that's it for me here, I'm pretty damn happy that's how I got to go out. And that says enough for Jake. I'm not going to dwell on it too much because we don't need to think about postseason or off-season moves right now. That's fantastic for Jake. Overall notes in this game, St. Louis City remains undefeated against the Houston Dynamo at City Park. They've got a 3-win, no draw, no loss record. And City finishes the season 9-0-1 in home matches across all competitions when scoring 2 goals or more. They get leads, they get big leads, and they can hold leads. And so that's another fantastic thing to see City end the season on a high note. Now, before we finish this one off, let me touch on a few listener comments. Put out something on Twitter last night, just asking for feedback. Quick comments on the game. Aaron L. I know Klaus does a lot of little things, but Betcher at the 9 and Alm out wide looks really interesting with Seti, Cello, and Leuven feeding them next season. How does this make camp more interesting for the starting striker role? I think it helps to open it up. I wouldn't say that Klaus is in danger of losing a starting role necessarily, just because he had this kind of a performance, but it adds elements. I think it makes things a little easier to say, maybe Klaus starts 3 out of 4 games. Maybe we can go a different approach and know that we're not going to miss anything. There's a conversation in the live stream chat right now about Betcher being the new Nico Gioacchini. And I think that has a lot of merit in how this second striker has historically played off of Klaus. Aaron had that same comment that the role Betcher is playing in beating the lines, extending the play, not holding it up with the ball back to goal, that is reminiscent of what Nico Gioacchini would do underneath that striker. It's now Betcher extending play a little bit more. So you're seeing kind of a different facet than Nico had in a different part of the field. And the speed and talent of Betcher is absolutely clear. So no, I wouldn't say that Klaus is in danger of losing a starting job, but it makes camp more exciting because you can see different looks and not have to worry about losing any level of quality. That's the biggest thing to me. The MLS season's a slog. We know this. We've seen the injuries occur. We've seen them pile up. We've seen players break down at the back half of the season like we did last year. And so to be able to say we can start any of Alm, Klaus, Betcher, Hartl, Toyshirt, maybe Nukvi Thorson, and if we get somebody else in, that's 7 players when you have 4 positions, you feel confident going in. You know that you have top talent, but you can rotate that a little more regularly, keep guys fresh, and not just when you have these midweek matches. 4 matches in 4 weeks, maybe you give a guy a little bit of a break, bring him in. It just adds to what you bring in off the bench in the second half as well, but you have these better opportunities to give guys some rest, make them last, and then really extend your run into the postseason for next year. That's exciting for me in that regard. Tim Parker's bucket hat. The back line looks so phenomenal tonight, but mainly Kessler and Nilsson. Do y'all think they are the main center back pairing for 2025, or are we going to go out and get another center back starter? I would like to get another center back of that caliber, of that quality. The center back role is interesting for City because you have both Joachim Nilsson and Henry Kessler, but you also have Kyle Hebert under long-term contract. You have Michael Wenzel, who just signed a contract. And so you have a little bit of depth there. I mentioned center back as a position I want to see us sign a player in. Last week when Phil and I were talking in the wind down, I don't know the caliber, but I do think that as long as you see health going into the season for Joachim Nilsson, that's something that you can be optimistic about and know that if Nilsson's healthy, partnering with Kessler is the answer at center back. The biggest question going into the offseason will be, can you count on the health of Joachim Nilsson? And if not, that's when you might bring in another center back starter at that level. Jeremy says, most comprehensive and complete performance of the season, chef's kiss to that Kessler-Nilsson partnership. Tots was fantastic. Leuven showed quality delivery. Betcher was clinical, and Watts was very solid as well. Oh, what we may have to look forward to in 25. And I didn't even mention Akil Watts. When you don't mention a center defensive mid, I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing for a couple reasons. Number one is you're not leaving anything open for the defense. You're not allowing those deep runs. You're not doing anything centrally to cause that to be an issue. But also, you're just allowing others. You're doing the dirty work to allow others to shine. That's what Akil Watts did. It was a great job. STL City Italian, this team next year with A-plus subs, a top 4 contender in the West. Still have Ostrak and Salio coming back. Hard to pick a weak link tonight. Definitely wasn't Watts. We need that talent at the CDM position. Watts played great, and it's his spot to lose. Hack stays. What a game. And I am all here for that optimism. That's the kind of stuff we want going into this couple-week break. But you mentioned a couple things there. Ostrak and Salio. I just mentioned 6 potential attackers for those 4 roles up there. Ostrak is an attacking midfielder as well. I know he did the job this year covering for Eddie Leuven at central midfield, a little deeper, and it was great. I mean, he showed everything he needed to. Ostrak did, but he's an attacking midfielder by trade. So he's a part of that mix as well. You could say he's in conversation for depth at center mid, but he's one of those attackers that you have to consider. And whether it's breaking through and finding a spot alongside Hartl and Toyshirt, or being that quality off the bench, pushing, getting a spot start every now and then, he is part of that. And don't forget Salio. I feel, and this is probably my own doing, but I feel that we have Salio in the back of our minds, but because he's been out so long, even longer than Ostrak, you're so hyper focused on Toyshirt and Hartl, Betcher, and etc., getting Alm back, getting Klaus back, that Salio is just kind of out there. I have seen some posited graphics for next season of Salio on the left, or Salio as a super sub. Salio is also one of those attacking midfielders. So if you add him to the list, suddenly you're up to 8 or so that we currently have under roster. And I would say if you ask the fandom to pull those 8 players, you would probably say Nukvi Thorson is at the bottom of the list. But how can you really create that much space between that list? I mean, Thorson has 4 goals this year, playing out of position as a 9 most of the season when he's had significant minutes. Putting him back in his role as an attacking midfielder, left winger, second striker type thing, somebody where Salio has that same kind of positioning, that's where that type of player needs to be. Salio going into 2025 could be the X factor when it comes to how we're thinking about this attacking midfield. That's pretty damn exciting. Jerry, straight up, start to the top, trickle down, Lutzonomics. I like that phrase, Jerry, Lutzonomics. Jerry is always with the trust in Lutz. She's got her buttons and her towels and everything. Love the work that Lutz has done to put this team together, and we're really seeing the potential it has going into next season. St. Louis Bino Club, Kessler was incredible tonight. Andrew, shame that Yarrow didn't get on the field. No telling if he'll have another game in City Red. Touched on that a little bit. Yeah, we'll talk about that more in the offseason. But Kessler alongside Nilsson, I'm enamored with that center back pairing, because it was one of those things that we had so much promise and hope for, and now we're seeing it come to fruition a little bit. So exciting to see that. Thanks for the conversation in the live chat, everyone. If you haven't tuned in one of our live chats, usually it's not just me talking, but I see everything you guys are chatting about. I appreciate it so much. Really enjoy the interactions you guys have. Being a part of this, joining the conversation means the world. So let's get out of here. Let's go forward. Going forward means City is improving to 8, 12, and 13 on the season with 37 points through 33 games. Seeing that points be higher than games, something we haven't seen in quite a bit. And it brings a smile to your face knowing how we're finishing this season, or at least finishing the CITYPARK version of our season. City improves their goal differential to -10, 49 goals scored, 59 allowed. But they also pull even with FC Dallas for 11th place right now. As I'm recording this, which is Sunday morning, FC Dallas plays on Sunday night against the Portland Timbers. And so we'll see how that works out. We'll see what Dallas's result is going into decision day, and whether what they need to do for St. Louis to potentially jump them. But right now, City has put 6 points of separation between them and Sporting KC. Sporting KC, I saw comments after our game about how it was, by all regards, their second worst season in their history. And a lot of fans are saying it was their absolute worst, because the other worst was in 99. And so you have that vibe there, and you have ours. I think we'll take ours every single moment of the day. So City now has FC Dallas and Austin FC right in front of them. There's a reality, and it's potentially a low chance because it relies on 2 teams to not win, but there's a reality where we could finish 10th at the end of the season, just one spot out of a playoff berth. And while we have been eliminated for a bit, that's pretty exciting. You look back on the season, you're not going to really think about when we were eliminated. You look at the table and you think there is a difference. Let's just say this. There is a difference between the St. Louis team that we had this year finishing 10th and finishing 13th, right above San Jose. We're trending right. We're controlling what we can control now, even though it came a little bit too late. So Dallas will play Sunday night against Portland. If Dallas can't get more than 2 points out of their final 2 matches, and if Austin FC loses as well, then a win against Minnesota will do that. It'll jump us to that 10th spot. So now we have rest. Now we have 2 full weeks off. There's an international break coming up. No match next week. City wraps their 2024 campaign with an away match in St. Paul at Allianz Field to play Minnesota United, which is going to be another gut check. I mean, this is a good match to end the season on. Minnesota has their playoff berth locked in. St. Louis struggled this year against Minnesota at home. They beat Minnesota on the road last year, so we know they can do it. Let's see if they can cap off this good run of form post-Leagues Cup, where this leads into the Hackworth conversation. City's gone 4-2-2 since Leagues Cup. And if you count Leagues Cup and the arrival of our new players fully after that SKC game where Toy Shirt made his first appearance, you have City going 6-3-3 in regulation with all those new guys, with Hackworth's revamped team, with his reinforcements. 6-3-3 is a pretty good record, and it's a great record when you consider where St. Louis was going into that form, going into those few games for Leagues Cup. Now, I'll leave it with the pervasive question that's going to be asked over the next couple of weeks while we review this game and bide our time for the Minnesota game in a couple weeks. It's John Hackworth. Did Hackworth show enough, and has he shown enough and gotten the most out of his players to earn a chance to be a full-time head coach? I would say after this match against a Houston team that is fighting for a top 4 spot, at least they were, despite being without Hector Herrera, despite being away, I would say that Hackworth at least has put in a strong maybe for earning a chance to be the permanent head coach. Maybe even greater than 50-50 at this point, because he's taken what we know we'll have in 2025 and beyond, and he's produced a 6-3-3 record. You extrapolate that out, that's top 4 potentially. That's a playoff team firmly. And is that what you want from your head coach, or are you shooting bigger? Do you think that you can do better than 6-3-3? That's interesting. I mean, that's a fascinating discussion. Is Hackworth got a 6-3-3 record out of these players immediately upon their arrival? Do we think that's sustainable going in the future for what Hackworth can get out of these players? We're not looking for a head coach that can implement his own style. We're looking for a head coach who can implement what Lutz gives him and get the most out of their players. That's what the head coach's role is in our system and in a German-inspired system that we have. So we've seen a return of sorts to City Park being a fortress now. All lines are working well together. Even when a player like Klaus is frustrated, you make the necessary subs, you make it work. You end with a clean sheet at home. We'll see if this has made as strong of an impression as it immediately has for the fan base, and whether Hackworth can win or get a result against Minnesota as his final opportunity to prove himself and prove that he should get this job, a job that he has said multiple times he wants. Let's be very clear. This isn't just Hackworth holding the fort and being given a job. He's fighting for it as well. So getting Roman Berkey a clean sheet is getting himself a clean sheet just as much. And there's arguments both ways, obviously, but I do think Hack has made a strong case so far. It's had its ups and downs. Midweek against LAFC was probably the lowest, but with the rotated lineup with midweek, it's hard to read too much into that. You look at the holistic, the 6-3-3 since the arrivals, since Hartl made his debut. We'll see if Hackworth can get a result against Minnesota that leaves Lutz with a good taste in his mouth going into the offseason. We'll see what the decisions end up being. I've gone on record saying I would bet, without any inside knowledge, that December 1st is a good cutoff point of when we might know for sure. I think it just makes sense to have your head coach locked in if you can, going into those offseason activities that will occur in December. Talking about the expansion draft for San Diego, talking about the super draft, free agency, waivers, all that stuff. So that's down the horizon. We will be looking at that a ton in November in the offseason for City. I hope everybody had a good time this weekend. If you went to City Park, you withstood the app issues. The $10 promo seemingly broke everything. Kudos and credit to the digital team for St. Louis City. I got to pat them on the back for the work they did to get it up and running. You hate when these things happen. And so there's a lot of complaining, a lot of frustration with the app. And I know the team felt incredibly bad and it was a rough night for everybody, but they got it working during the game. I believe they rolled over, Jerry says in the live chat, they rolled over the $10 promotion to the next day. So City 2 plays their final game on Sunday afternoon. Klaus and Salio have autograph sessions going on at 2:00 at City Pavilion. If you're listening to this before then, Try to make that. It's a City 2 fantastic finale before their choose your own adventure on Tuesday of this week, where they get to choose their playoff opponent. City's on a break. Let's chat about what we saw this weekend. Let's continue the positive conversation these next few weeks, and let's just have a good time. Let's be positive with our discourse. Let's continue the discussion and get everybody thinking. Thought-provoking conversations are absolutely fun to have. I'll be stepping away a little bit, taking a vacation over with my wife and family, and so it's going to be a little bit out of pocket for me, timing wise. I guess it worked out with this break. I'll be at an airport in Germany, in Frankfurt, for the Minnesota United game overnight at that point. So I'll see you on the other side of that. Hit me up on social media. Hit us up at Flyover Footy on social media. Looking forward to the continued conversations over the next few weeks. Thank you so much for joining me on Flyover Footy. The fallout, looking at the 3-1 win, a statement win over the Houston Dynamo to finish up the City Park portion of our schedule. My name is Matt Baker, and I will talk to you later. All right, folks. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate the conversation. You guys are awesome in the chat. I cannot thank you enough for having this conversation you guys are having in the chat, because it carries me through. It carries me through doing these solo. I love doing it. I didn't get to drink a sip of my coffee during this, but I love doing this. Love talking about this. Love getting my thoughts out there. Appreciate you listening. I will, Jerry, I'm planning on being at the Czech Republic Albania game, Nations League for UEFA, in 6 days, 5 days, whatever next Friday is. So first time I'll have been to a soccer match outside the U.S. Very excited about that. We'll post pics. Absolutely. Thanks for joining me, guys. Really appreciate it. And yeah, keep this discourse going. It's a fun time to be a City fan. The season itself didn't work out the way we wanted it to, but it's hard to say you could have more positivity going into the last game of the season, given how this season has gone holistically. Like, this is what you want to happen for a bad season. You want to have change realized, made, and then if time ran out, which it did, you build for the future. You build for what's to come. And that's what City's doing. So enjoy the rest of your weekend. Enjoy the week ahead.